Happy Friday. This is the Entrepreneurial Web. I'm your host, Jeremiah Fox. Welcome. Got a special treat for you today. Before we get started, I'm going to give you the message of the day, which actually comes from my guest, something that I read that he wrote. And it is better to be loved than feared.
Yeah. Words to live by. It's and sometimes tough to walk the walk. Yeah.
Sure. It's interesting because that's like, that it was coming from Machiavelli, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were writing about that in a LinkedIn article.
Right.
And you're from the Bronx.
Yes.
We've had this discussion many times, and it triggered scenes from the Bronx Tale when he was like, telling Cologino, his approach, and he was like, I don't want to live like that. And that just like came into my brain whenever I read that article. It was just like, that was a great article, by the way. I teared up by the end. It was really fascinating.
No, I'm glad.
Awesome.
I'm glad you liked it.
So why don't you tell them, since we're talking about it, what's up, Nancy? What's up, Bob? Welcome. Why don't you tell them about the LinkedIn article? Talk about, there's a lot to talk about. He's got a lot. We're going to need more time, I think. But we can start with that. It's a great article, I thought. I really enjoyed it.
Well, first and foremost, let me introduce myself.
His ring threw me off. I'm just let's start over. Rewind. No, go ahead. You can introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Jose Franco, and I am the owner of Stoop Juice, which is in Park Slope. And Jeremiah is someone that I hope to emulate, and I'm constantly picking his brain because I see the show's called the Entrepreneurial Web, and he is the epitome of an entrepreneur. And one of the things that we constantly talk about, because we vibe in this space, I have a juice bar and I want to do the right thing, but bills have to get paid.
They do.
So, that's unless anybody knows a landlord that in lieu of rent, he accepts hugs, then that's a game changer.
We'll work on that.
You know what I'm saying?
I would consider that. If I become a landlord, just give me a hug instead.
But along the lines of the article that I wrote on LinkedIn, it's an article that at the end of the day, what we do based on the profession, careers that we have, the business that we get into, it comes down to a choice. And it all stems from, I'm hoping, asking yourself who you are and the things that work for you. And one of the things that I know about myself is that I'm not a gangster. I'm not a bad person. I'm not 100% good either. Don't get
well,
that.
Well, neither am I. So be careful who you want to emulate.
Right.
When you said that, I was like, I don't know if he knows everything about it.
Right. Don't get that twisted. But my the thing with the Prince is this. I see the writing and how when the Prince was written, it was something that was written and that people kept hid. It was written for a prince. It was pretty much unsolicited advice. So there was this one. I'm gonna break it down along the lines of simple terms. I'm not gonna name drop or anything, but I'm just gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it real 100. This is the Bronx coming out of me, right? So it was this guy that he was looking for work. So what does he do? He used to work for the people that were in power before the Medici family, and they got bumped. They weren't in power anymore. So what does he do? There's a new prince. So the way he tried to impress the prince, he goes to the prince and he writes the prince. And it's pretty much this manual. And it has a lot of valid points along the lines of how to be effective and how to work around people to secure power. And the principal question of the prince is, do you rather be feared or do you rather be loved? And it's a choice you have to make. And the overarching message of the prince was, it's better to be feared than to be loved. And I disagree with that. And my argument is centered on the fact that don't look at the hype of the book. Look at the man who wrote it and the outcome of his life. So that this was this person, he wrote this book, and he was living in the outskirts of town, and his writing was received, and the prince just looked at the book. He said, thanks, but no thanks, and tossed it. And then the book, maybe 30, 35 years later, that's when it got into circulation. So he died and he didn't make an impact. So the idea is, yes, they've been used. It's stuff that Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, Napoleon all gravitated to. But in terms of the person and in something that you apply to your daily life, it was useless. It reminds me of the saying about philosophy. They say, philosophy, you can apply philosophy to everything in the past and you'll win. You can apply philosophy to everything in the future and you'll win. But where philosophy loses is when it goes up against evil in the present, and philosophy always loses. So that's
interesting.
So that's why. So because I'm not trying to overtly go around chopping people's heads.
Yeah.
I'm not, you know, I'm not a big fan of that idea in the Prince.
And you saw a lot of that growing up, I think, right? Ooh. I mean, we've talked about where you grew up, which is a place I spent a good amount of time.
Okay.
170th, 171st and White, to be specific,
wow.
in the Bronx, between
wow.
Grand Concourse and Jerome.
Wow.
An old roommate lived there, and I probably spent a good 3 months of my life hanging around there in like the late 90s too.
Wow.
It was, I mean, you grew up in a much different time, but even then I was like, whoa, I was running, high stepping. You got out of the train into the building quick.
yeah. The Bronx is real. You know, here's the thing about the Bronx. The Bronx is like any suburban community. The only difference is that people are on top of each other.
Did you say it's like any suburban?
Listen, yeah,
it's just like any suburban community.
This is how it's like any suburban community. The difference is that people on top of each other, and where in suburbia, if you have twisted things going on in your house, you have a backyard and you have fences to separate them. When you're in a building that there's 100 families, and let's say there's a lot of dysfunction going on,
and no backyards,
yeah. you're gonna be in people's business, and what happens is the facade gets lowered because people have to live amongst each other, so that they don't have any heirs. So that
becomes very real.
Oh my God.
Exposure.
Oh my God.
On the level of like social media, right? It was like it was the first social media experience, 1970s Bronx.
Well, for me, I mean, it all depends how I want to package myself and the story that I want to say.
Right. Absolutely.
Like when I want to say a grimy story that I'm looking for empathy, I can tell the story of right across the street from my house there used to be a dope spot.
This one really like resonated with me when you told me this story. Like, I just never forgot it. I was just like, damn,
right.
That's like, you know, you see movies, you hear about it. Me not growing up here, you know, I was aware of it, but when you told me the story and like the impact, it was heavy, man. It was really heavy. Go ahead.
Right. So for me, one of the things when we watch movies, when we're anything, the way drug fiends, dope fiends, and people that use drugs are portrayed in movies, it's underwhelming. And I get it. They do it because they don't want to make it alluring. They don't want to make it something that, you know, you watch on TV and you want to emulate. But for me, my reality was different, because there was a dope spot across the street from my house, but there was etiquette among the people selling dope. So there was a unwritten rule that you can't serve dope during school hours. That was a no-no, and they would go hard at you. But if you serve dope in after 4 o'clock, that was more acceptable. It didn't mean that they wouldn't still try to catch you, but it was more acceptable. So I remember coming home from school, and there was a line forming, and what they would say is, if you were buying what they call bundles, is 10 bags of $10 bags, so it's 100. If you were buying bundles for you to go on the line, and if there's still bags left, then we'll serve people. So what happened was people created communities, and they pooled their money together and had someone stand online so they can buy these 10 packs of 10. But the thing that made the impression on me is, as a kid, I was like in the 6th, 7th grade, I looked on the line and they didn't look like the people that were portrayed on TV.
Right.
They were people's parents. They were like teachers.
Yeah, you said you saw a teacher from your school, and I was just like,
they were mailman. These people, they looked like they were coming home from work or took an extended lunch. They were, yes, some of them had looked a little shabby, but for the most part, that could have been my mother, that could have been my brother. So that made an impact, and that stayed with me.
Yeah, well, that story stayed with me too. I mean, it's remarkable. So you saw some considerable hustles early on. I mean, you know a little too much about the distribution. Oh, was that your first gig? You were like, man, I gotta make some money.
There's this woman that comes into Stoop Juice, and she is a teacher at, I don't want to say her name, but she's a teacher at PS10, and she pretty much chased the drug dealers from her neighborhood, from her house. And we were talking, and I remember her pausing, and she's saying, how do you know so much?
Yeah.
But she looked at me like, was that you that was in front of my house in 85? Like, that's pretty much. So
was she from Park Slope, or she was from the Bronx?
Park Slope.
Yeah.
It was from Park Slope.
It was rough, man.
Yeah.
It was rough.
So she, she pointed that out.
Especially up by 10. That was like no man's land.
Right.
Going towards the cemetery.
Oh, yeah. One of the things, I don't know if you know this about me. I coach baseball. I've been coaching.
Yeah, no, we've talked about this many times.
I've been coaching inner city kids, predominantly inner city kids baseball. So one of the things that I try to do, is I still try to act hip around kids. It's a curse, and it's a blessing.
I do too. It doesn't always work. My daughter would be like, what?
Right. So sure enough, one of the talks that I like giving these kids is to tell them why, from a business perspective, why drug dealing doesn't pay.
Right.
And I break it down. So one of the books that I tell them to read is a book by a guy named Walter Block, and he wrote a book, and it's called Defending the Undefendable. And it's pretty much presenting the strongest arguments if you want to be a pimp, if you want to be a pusher. No, it's the craziest book. And this
the strongest argument.
He's a liberal. This guy
clearly
lectures in the Cato Institute. So the reason why I want them to, first they have the avenue that they can turn around and see those arguments. Then I come back and I deconstruct it. And what it comes down to is this: if you want to run any type of legitimate organization, let's say if you're running your little scam, let's say you're the next Scarface, or you're the next Godfather. What happens is, at the beginning, you have this nucleus of friends, and what the added value is the nucleus, the trust that you have from the nucleus. And if you can keep that nucleus without anybody getting in trouble, or anybody going to jail, or anybody having a drug habit or anything, it's going to be easy street. But the way reality works, that's not how it works.
Right.
People get hooked, people go to jail. So then what happens is, fast forward a year and a half later, and now all your boys are locked up, and you still want to have that type of network, but you don't know these people. You don't have the history.
Yeah.
And you're trying to link up with strangers
right.
that you don't know how many miles they have, what they've done, who they are. And you're thirsty, and you have this blind trust, and you think that people are going to be like your friends that are probably dead, strung out, and whatnot. And that's where I tell them, show me a way that that's unavoidable. And more times than not, they don't reply, but at least you plant that seed in the head. And hopefully it's something that they stay with, and they're like, wow, that makes sense.